Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. They barged into the room, but the elder in the painting didn't stop. He went into another room, and Qin Mu quickly followed after him. There, he came face to face with another person, and the two of them nearly collided as they avoided each other in a hurry. At the instant the two figures met, they were both astonished. Heavenly Devil Cult Master. Barbarian Dai Empire's soldier. Qin Mu's reaction was faster. At the instant they crossed each other, his palm was raised, sounds bursting off it. With thunderous rumbles, his mudra was imprinted on the back of that person's heart. Tempest of the Nine Dragons. His palm landed on the back of that person's heart, and his strength poured out. Only then did that person react. When the knife pellets rose into the air, the power in Qin Mu's move had already burst forth. The dragon-shaped force bombarded the person. The first wave crumbled the vital chi protecting his body, the second wave destroyed the structure of the muscles at the back of his heart, the third wave crumbled his bones, the fourth wave shattered his heart, and the fifth wave pierced his chest, transforming into a blood dragon that burst out from his body. The knife pellets of that soldier from Barbarian Dai Empire rose into the sky, and fine curved blades hummed as they separated. At this moment, Qin Mu raised carefree sword, and it sliced the knife pellets into halves. They instantly broke down and transformed into hundreds of broken knives that dropped to the floor. The vital chi of that Barbarian Dai Empire's soldier dispersed, and he collapsed to the ground, dead. Pan Gongso was a step too late, unable to save that soldier. By the time he got close, Qin Mu had already closed in and killed that person. Pan Gongso couldn't help becoming furious and shouted sternly, "Cult Master Qin, that was my man." Qin Mu's carefree sword returned back into its sheath, and he shook his head. "Your man's first reaction in seeing me was to kill me, so I only defended myself. If I didn't make the first move, I'd be the one lying down there. If Grandmaster is not happy, why don't you walk in front? If your men meet you, they won't make a move." Pan Gongso was hesitant. If he was to walk in front of Qin Mu, he would show him his back. Seeing how the brat had killed that Barbarian Dai Empire's soldier with nimbleness, it was clear that he would be even more nimble if there was a chance to kill him. He didn't dare to hand his back to Qin Mu. Furthermore, Qin Mu only mentioned one situation. If the next person wasn't Pan Gongso's man but the two white bats or the dragon Chelin, Pan Gongso could already imagine his end once he got trapped between the two forces. However, it was a horrible plan to run around aimlessly. Qin Mu was barging into rooms at random without any pattern. It was clear that he hadn't solved the integration on the treasured ship. If Pan Gongso continued to go through room after room with him aimlessly, he would probably also lose his direction and would have to recalculate the structure of the rooms on the ship. "I can't let this brat lead the way," Pan Gongso thought while opening a room. Here, sound of a door opening came from his back, and he saw that Qin Mu had already run into another room. Pan Gongso was furious, but he could only chase after. In the end, the silver helmet that controlled this ship was still with Qin Mu. The two of them came to the next room and suddenly stopped. Qin Mu lifted his feet, noticing that there was some sticky liquid stuck to it. The room was covered in green sticky liquid that filled the ground and walls. Even the table was covered with it. Qin Mu looked around and saw that the elder from the painting was also in the room. He was carefully avoiding the sticky liquid, moving through places that did not have it. He was a human from a painting, and this sticky liquid was dangerous to him as it could glue him to a place, thus he had to avoid it. Pan Gongso also saw the old man from the painting and was astonished. He hurriedly waved the Thousand Locusts banner in his hands and violent clank sounded out as Qin Mu executed his flying swords to block the flying locusts. Pan Gongso was furious and looked at Qin Mu while asking in a stern voice, "Doesn't Cult Master Qin owe me an explanation?" Qin Mu said indifferently, "My surname is Qin, this is the best explanation." Pan Gongso's heart trembled violently as he instantly caught the crux of the matter. The terrifying entity whose eyes were 900 yards apart had been waiting for a person with the surname Qin. The reason why the two of them had caught its interest was because they were both Qin. He was extremely clever, otherwise, he wouldn't have survived for so long. He thought to himself, could the owner of this ship have had the surname Qin? This brat and the owner of the ship are from the same family? If that's the case, then he must also be from Carefree Village. No wonder this guy came all the way here, but wait a minute. 16 years old, that terrifying entity had been waiting for a youth that has the surname Qin and is 16 years old. This brat is also 16 years old. 16 years ago, this ship crashed here, so there has to be a connection between all this. He suppressed his astonishment and waved his 1,000 locusts banner. Qin Mu then pulled back his flying swords. The old man in the painting found another path and went through another door. The two of them immediately followed after him, and when they pushed open the door, they saw a long corridor. Pan Gongso was stunned. He had calculated out the spell of integration used by these rooms, so he was able to find where the bridge was, but he hadn't expected such a corridor. By right, the total number of rooms should be what I had calculated, so why is there some place I don't know about? He was confused. If he did not solve the spell of space integration, how did he find the bridge? If he had solved it, then why wasn't this long corridor present in his result? In his calculation, there was absolutely no way this long corridor could exist. In that case, there was only one possibility. The spell of space integration was just an outer structure used to fool people. This was to make people who entered to think that they had searched the whole ship and neglect the true secrets hidden below. Even the silver helmet that Qin Mu possessed might only be a treasure to fool people and couldn't truly control the ship. The gods of Carefree Village are indeed extraordinary, even I was fooled. Luckily the Qin brat is here, otherwise, I wouldn't have discovered this secret. Pan Gongso's gaze flickered. In the last room, there had been a lot of green liquid, which meant that the unknown existence had also found this place and killed its way in. The old man from the painting was sprinting through the wall of the long corridor, moving up and down from time to time, seemingly avoiding something. Qin Mu and Pan Gongso looked over and saw numerous markings left on the wall. There were deep palm imprints as well as other types of palm imprints. There were also strange imprints of weapons that were incomparably terrifying. It seemed like just a slight touch would cause their destructive energies to activate and wipe out everything in the surroundings. These were marks left behind by divine weapons. Other than marks of divine weapons, there were also imprints left behind by divine arts. They were not big, but still contained a terrifying power that emanated a pulsing glow which could make people's hearts palpitate. The glow of the imprints was due to runes, and they were sometimes bright and sometimes dark. They were complicated and profound, hard to understand. When a person looked at them for the first time, they wouldn't understand anything. But once their mind slowly seeped inside, they would instantly feel the marvel of the world flooding over, sending them into a trance. It's different from the stone wall of Dao Sect's Dao sword, but it has the same result. Qin Mu and Pan Gongso couldn't help exclaiming in admiration. The imprints from the divine arts and divine weapons were simply a treasure vault of techniques. Even though these weren't comparable to the 14 writings of Dao sword from Dao Sect, if one could comprehend all the marvels contained in the imprints on the corridor and attain the techniques and divine arts there, they could probably found their own sacred ground. Both their hearts stirred, but they had no choice but to hold their minds back. Their enemy was right beside them, and if they fell into comprehension, they would definitely be killed by the bad egg beside them. Even though they would have very much liked to get rid of the other party and take this place for themselves, the imprints on the walls were not very stable. If someone came into contact with the imprints accidentally, the explosion from power contained in them could easily kill them hundreds or thousands of times. That old man from the painting was still leading the way. The long corridor seemed to have no end. Since the time they had stepped in it, they should have long walked out of the ship, but there was still no sight of the end. This was an even superior spell of integration which used great magic power to warp space, folding it and stretching instead of using the skin and bones of Daotai to expand the space. It was such a narrow corridor, but there were numerous imprints of divine arts and divine weapons on the walls. From them, it could easily be imagined how fierce the battle had been. But the most crucial point was that when these strong practitioners had made their moves here, the power of their divine arts was condensed and would only explode when it hit the enemy. If it didn't hit the enemy, not an ounce of power would leak out. This was extremely terrifying. It meant that their control of power had reached an extremely intricate step, using the least amount of power to create great damage. It was extremely difficult to achieve this step. Even if it was a divine arts practitioner of Six Directions realm, the explosion of a divine art could sweep a radius of numerous yards. If a divine arts practitioner was to condense the damage to their palm, not many people would be able to achieve it. But if they did that, the destructiveness of the attack would probably be multiplied by 100 times. If gods shrank their divine arts to such a state, how terrifying would their destructive power be? Qin Mu and Pan Gongso's eyes lighted up, and they immediately realized the strength of this. If both of them had similar cultivation, but one could shrink the explosion of their divine arts, wouldn't the other party be killed when the two of them clashed again? Furthermore, the power wouldn't leak, and the exhaustion of magic power would be cut to the minimum. It would allow one to fight for an even longer time. However, both of their techniques and divine arts didn't have such a fine method of control. To be able to control divine arts to such detail required extremely high attainments in algebra. Dao sect had extremely high attainments in algebra, but even its people couldn't achieve this step, otherwise, Dao sect would be invincible. I guess only by being proficient in calculations can one control their power to such an extent, right? A gentle breeze suddenly came through the long corridor. Qin Mu and Pan Gongso both grunted, and their bones cracked. This wasn't the breeze putting pressure on their bodies, but the air of a god that had come with the breeze putting so much pressure on them that they almost couldn't catch their breaths. Qin Mu immediately transformed into a black shadow and sunk into the wall to move through it. Pan Gongso saw this and found this to be clever. He also hurriedly transformed into a shadow to sink into the wall. The both of them then avoided the imprints in the wall, moving forward until they soon saw the source of the air of God. It was a divine corpse, one that belonged to a god. His head was pierced through, and half of his body was petrified while the other half was still corporeal. He had been killed by the enemy before he could finish petrifying. The fierceness of the battle in the corridor was slightly out of the two's expectations. They slithered through the wall and followed the old man from the painting. After dozens of yards, they saw a second divine corpse, followed by the third, fourth. Qin Mu and Pan Gongso's hearts palpitated as they moved forward while trembling with fear. Finally, they came to the end of the corridor and saw a door. It opened automatically with a creak. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment before coming down from the wall and entering. Pan Gongso was a step later as he wanted Qin Mu to first test out if there were any dangers inside. After he had entered and didn't seem to meet any danger, Pan Gongso came down from the wall. But just as he wanted to walk through, the door suddenly creaked and shut itself, blocking him out. Pan Gongso immediately went to bang on the door, but it wouldn't open no matter what. Suddenly, he remembered that doors had to be pulled open, and the moment he did so, he rushed in and raised his head to take a look. An ice-cold feeling swept across his heart, and beads of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. Outside was the Yudu world filled with darkness and glowing light swimming around the sky like the stars. He was currently standing on the deck of the treasured ship. Qin Mu and the old man from the painting had vanished. It was obvious that after the door had shut, the spell of space and time integration had shifted the space so it was no longer the room Qin Mu had entered. Damn it! Pan Gongso was furious and turned around to open the door, but the room behind it was no longer the mysterious corridor. It was a new room. I can't believe a word that Qin brat says. Pan Gongso's fury couldn't be contained. He entered a random room while shouting sternly, "Where's the working together? What about being friends on the ship and enemies after disembarking? Liar! Running away when you meet something good and even hogging it for yourself. Stuff yourself to death, you bastard!" When he was behind Qin Mu, he had clearly seen Qin Mu close the door as he was entering the mysterious room. It wasn't the door that had shut automatically, but Qin Mu who closed the door to use the spell of space integration on the ship to block him. The brat had clearly decided to hog everything for himself. Pan Gongso quickly calmed down and calculated the second layer of spell of space integration. He said coldly, Since I already know that there's a second layer of space, I can easily calculate where that long corridor is, so you can forget about hogging it by yourself. He started calculating as he opened room after room to search for his subordinates. However, there were too many rooms in this ship and his subordinates had long lost their way, going from one room to another. They tried to find a way out only to go in deeper and deeper. Pan Gongso had already found the method of solving the outer layer of the spell of integration, but he still spent quite some time to find his people. He even met the two bats and the dragon Qilin on the way. The dragon Qilin was actually trying to calculate the method for the spell of integration and had almost found the location of the bridge. The two sides fought a fierce battle. Pan Gongso and the rest suffered a massive defeat, but luckily a shaman king barged into the room at that moment and managed to save Pan Gongso and the rest. When they found the other shaman kings, Pan Gongso still couldn't find the location of the long corridor, making him feel even a stronger sense of defeat. It's fine even if I can't find that place, since that Qin brat will definitely come back. I'll just take him down then and force him to hand over the silver helmet and spit out all the secrets. In the room at the end of the long corridor, Qin Mu blinked his eyes innocently. He had deliberately shut Pan Gongso out. The whole journey, the old man had led him to discover the secret of this ship, and since he was about to find the secret, there was no need for Pan Gongso to stay behind him to be a nuisance. His aim in agreeing to ally with Pan Gongso was to push Pan Gongso out to tank damage for him in times of danger. Once there was no longer any danger, it was natural that he should kick Pan Gongso out. Grandmaster, you must have thought about this as well, right? But I'm still a little superior. He turned around and examined his surroundings. He was in an unimaginable room. It was similar to Bent Mountain Shrine that he had seen underwater, which was outrageously vast. It was close to 10 miles wide, so it was like a small world hidden in the ship that was a little smaller than Bent Mountain Shrine. However, this room was much bigger than the treasured ship, so to hide such a large space within it was truly inconceivable. Qin Mu raised his head to take a look at the sky, which was constructed from long sticks of wood. The one in Bent Mountain Shrine was constructed from the bones of a Daotai divine beast, so the two were different. The inner body of a Daotai divine beast naturally had a vast space, so the shrine only needed to be constructed outside the bones. The space inside it would then naturally become vast. However, the space in this room was forged by using great magic power and divine arts to warp space. This method was much more difficult. In the center of this vast and spectacular room was an incomparably huge tree that reached the sky. The roots on the ground coiled and snaked around like dragons, giving off an ancient feeling. Glowing lights flowed through the body of the huge tree from the roots to the sky. The glow shone continuously and lighted up the entire room. The glowing lights seemed to have rune markings flowing inside them as they flowed below the bark of the tree toward the sky and the surroundings of the room. They entered the body of the ship. The sound of a heartbeat came from the body of the tree after some time, giving off a deafening boom. Qin Mu examined the tree with a look of doubt. The ship was constructed around an unimaginably huge and ancient tree. The long pieces of wood in the sky had to be its branches. Furthermore, from the flowing light and the heartbeat that came from the tree trunk, the ancient tree was still alive and acting as the core of the treasured ship. It could even be said to be the source of its power. However, how many years must it have taken for such a huge tree to grow? Why did this ancient tree have such tremendous power which could be used to move the treasured ship and sustain it for a long journey? As expected, the bridge and the silver-colored helmet aren't really used to control the treasured ship. This is. Qin Mu's gaze landed on the ground, and it was bright and clean as a mirror. The elder from the painting was sticking to the floor and waved at him before running forward. Qin Mu hurriedly caught up with him with endless curiosity. Was this old man from the painting painted out? This kind of path of painting seems to be slightly superior to Grandpa Def's. Even though Grandpa Def's paintings can bestow a divine soul to a dot using mutual sensitivity, his paintings that come to life don't last long before turning back into ink. On the other hand, this old man from the painting looks like a living and breathing being. Besides him only being able to travel through the walls, there's little difference between him and normal life forms. In the world, is there really a person whose painting path is superior to that of Grandpa Def? Impossible. He instantly thought of the key point. The person who had drawn the old man from the painting might not have surpassed death in the painting path. Instead, they surpassed him in the path of creation. This person had drawn the old man and bestowed life to him using the path of creation, bringing the old man from the painting to life so he would become a secret guardian and guide. Death's painting didn't rely on cultivation, but on his attainments in his painting path. Qin Mu caught up to the old man from the painting that was sprinting to the ancient tree in the center. As he was about to get near, he frowned slightly. He saw that the bright and clean floor was once again covered in a pile of green sticky liquid as if something had crawled past the floor. The closer Qin Mu got to the ancient tree, the more of the green sticky liquid he saw. The old man from the painting had also become more careful, avoiding the sticky liquid as he closed in on the ancient tree. Qin Mu sized up the surroundings with alertness. This place was very vast, but after looking around, he saw nothing that was terrifying. However, the sticky liquid unnerved him. He had seen it on the deck of the ship, and that was when he had encountered the Devil Chi invasion which had flooded towards them. There had been a terrifying entity hidden in that Devil Chi. The room before entering the long corridor had also been covered in this kind of liquid. Now that it was all over the place, it meant that the ancient tree was of extreme importance to the owner of the sticky liquid. Qin Mu looked around, and his uneasiness grew. The more he looked, the more he felt like this was a nest, the nest of the sticky liquid's owner. Finally, Qin Mu reached the bottom of the tree following the old man. When he got there, he was slightly stunned. He saw the man in white that he had seen in the illusion. To be exact, he only saw his face. The owner of the treasured ship, the man in white that had the surname Qin and had come from Carefree Village, had merged with the ancient tree, becoming one with it. Only his face was shown on the outside, and even it was not fully revealed. It had nearly completely merged with the ancient tree, and his eyes were lifeless. The heartbeat that rang out before had to be his heart beating very slowly. Qin Mu was stunned. The man in white had to have used some unique method to extend his life by merging himself with the tree and linking their lives. However, the disadvantage of this method was extremely huge, as it would make one become part of the tree, unable to move and even slowly turn into a tree. The person's injury had to have been extremely severe, so severe that he couldn't endure it any longer. He had gotten chased by his enemies all the way to this place. He got rid of all of them, but he had no choice but to execute a forbidden skill to transform himself into a part of the ancient tree to live on. Qin Mu looked at him, and the eyes of the man in white began to open with difficulty. They were like two eyeballs sculpted into the wood, barely able to see an unclear image ahead of them. Was it you who had this old man from the painting guide me here? Qin Mu felt that this man was indescribably familiar, and there seemed to be a connection between them. This made his heart stir uncontrollably, and he asked, "You called Qin Fengqing? Are you from Carefree Village?" The man in the tree seemed to slowly get a clearer view of his face and become slightly excited. He opened his mouth with difficulty, but the tongue had already turned into wood, so he couldn't make a sound. Qin Mu was stunned. The drawback of this kind of forbidden skill was too strong. Even though the life of the man in white was extended, his senses and his body functions were all mostly lost. "Do you recognize this jade pendant?" Qin Mu hurriedly plucked the jade pendant from his neck and pushed it in front of the man while suppressing the excitement in his heart. "Do you recognize it? This was inside my swaddle and I've always kept it with me. Is this Qin word the Qin word of Carefree Village?" The man in white became even more excited, and the ancient tree trembled. It seemed like the man in the tree was struggling to break free from the restraints and grab the jade pendant with his hand. Rings and rings of light flowed down the trunk of the tree and suppressed his struggle. He opened his mouth, seeming to have a lot of things he wanted to tell Qin Mu, but he couldn't say a word. Qin Mu's expression turned dull. He seemed to be talking to the man in the tree and also to himself as he muttered, "I've heard from Granny that there was the corpse of a woman who'd carried the basket and sent me into disabled elderly village in great ruins. I met her under the river, but no matter what, I couldn't see her clearly. I only have this jade pendant which I've been wearing ever since I was young, and I always keep hoping to find where I've come from, if my family is still there." He sat down under the tree with his arms hugging his knees. On his fingertip hung the jade pendant which swung to and fro. I feel like my parents could still be alive and waiting for me to find them. I've never met them before. A little girl who had become the sun guardian told me that I may be from Carefree Village, so I tried my best to go there. I scouted out news of Carefree Village and tried to find the path there, but I've failed over and over again. I even implicated village chief and the rest, which almost resulted in all of them dying because of me. I didn't tell them about this place this time because I was afraid of implicating them again. Qing Fengqing, you call Qing Fengqing, right? I found you, but I didn't expect that you wouldn't be able to tell me anything. Is it really that hard to go home and learn about one's birth? He buried his face in his arms and didn't say another word. Drip, drop. There were tears falling down, and Qin Mu raised his head while wiping his own eyes to look up. Tears were rolling down the cheeks of the man in the tree. Suddenly, something seemed to squirm in the tree above and slither down while coiling around the trunk like a huge snake. A queer and cryptic voice came out from its mouth. Qin Hanjin, now that you met Qin Fengqing, your wish should be fulfilled, right? Qin Mu's thoughts went into disorder. Qin Hanjin, Qin Fengqing? The family register that he had found in the study room had recorded the people of founding emperor's bloodline, and on the last page of the family register was the sentence, 107th generation, son of Hanjin, Fengqing. Qing Fengqing was the son of Qin Hanjin. So what did the words from the weird thing that slithered down from the tree mean? Who was she calling Qin Hanjin? And who was the Qin Fengqing that she mentioned? Qin Mu's body trembled, and his face turned pale, bloodless. He was Qin Fengqing, and the man in the tree was Qin Hanjin. The last person in the family register of founding emperor was none other than him, and the man in the tree was his father. This person who had fused with this ancient tree was his father? Was he the kin that he had been longing for every day? His closest kin. Why had he become like this? Qin Mu repeatedly told himself to stay calm, since old Ma had once told him to never lose his composure no matter what he encountered. He needed to stay level-headed. Even if came face to face with an apocalypse, he could find a way to survive in a sure death situation if only he kept his calm. Cripple had also once told him to always maintain his smile and stay positive. It was not only to numb the enemies but to also keep his own spirits up. Even if a leg was chopped off, he always had to show his most sincere smile. Only then would he have a chance to escape. Granny Sai had also once said that no matter if his heart was plagued by darkness or a devil, he needed to stay strong. Once he was messed up, everything would be over. However, even if danger was close to Qin Mu, he couldn't compose himself. When his father, his closest kin that he had never met before, had entered such a state, he couldn't do what old Ma, Granny Sai, and Cripple had told him. Qin Mu tried his best to compose himself and not think about the man in the tree or even care about him. He suppressed the trembling of his body. Suddenly, he felt a slight pain in his palms. He had subconsciously gripped his fists so tight that his nails stabbed into his palms, bringing out blood. Qin Mu raised his head and looked at the mysterious entity that was slithering down. It was half a snake and half a human that had an extremely huge body. Even though the lower half was that of a snake, it had no scales. The upper half of the body was that of a woman. She was very beautiful and alluring, but the voice that came from her mouth belonged to a man. Her body left a trail of the sticky liquid. She looked like the form of Saturn Sovereign that Qin Mu transformed into, but her form was much more primitive. There seemed to be something like two flesh membranes growing on the back of her neck, and when she spoke, they would open up like two fans stabbing on the sides of her neck, going over her head and trembling continuously to create the sounds. She seemed to not be able to open her mouth to speak. Instead, she relied on the trembling of the flesh membranes to make noise. Because of that, her voice was very weird and cryptic. The flesh membranes had to be her vocal cords, and on their tips were bone spikes that were 2 feet long and looked like javelins. When the membranes opened, 2 pictures of black eyeballs would be revealed, which seemed like 2 strange eyes. According to what Qin Mu knew, there were 2 forms of Saturn Sovereign. The first kind was a simple Saturn Sovereign's form that didn't have Gate of Heaven influence or the scripture in hand. The other kind was Qin Mu's one, which had Gate of Heaven influence behind him and a scripture in his hand. However, the strange life form in front of him had a form that was even more primitive. It didn't look like she had cultivated this form but was born in it. This was a life form of Yudu that might even be a god. She and the owner of the eyes that were 900 yards apart were two different people. You and I made a promise, Qin Hanjin. She slithered to the bottom of the tree and coiled around it. Her alluring face closed in on the face of the man in the tree and rubbed her head against his. The flesh membranes behind her neck trembled and gave off a sound as she laughed. You and I made the pact of Earth Count that as long as you find your son named Qin Fengqing, you will let go of everything and follow me to Yudu, handing over the location of Carefree Village. Now that you have found him, your wish is achieved and it's time to fulfill your promise. The man in the tree didn't move, his gaze still on Qin Mu's body. His corporeal body had already turned into wood, and his eyes could no longer see the person in front of him clearly. Yet tears were still flowing out from them. The strange life form surrounded the body of the ancient tree and left the man alone for a moment. As she slithered around leisurely, her voice floated over erratically. When you barged into Yudu world and broke the ceiling barrier, you were left only with a last breath, so you merged with this divine tree. This was for no other reason than to meet with your son, so you exhausted all you could to preserve your life. I came here and accompanied you. In time, you promised me that as long as you meet your son, you will be able to let go of everything, no matter if it's your life or Carefree Village. You'd be willing to hand over your soul to Earth Count as well as the location of Carefree Village. I agreed to your terms, which was why I didn't take your life. You also have a Saturn Sovereign's form? The strange Yudu life form suddenly stretched her snake body and slithered away from the body of the towering tree, landing back on the ground. Yet her long tail was still coiled around the tree and not completely off. Looking down at this miniature youth in front of her, she let out a playful smile. What a pitiful little thing, how laughable and immature you are to show off this trick in front of me. Don't you know? Saturn's Sovereign's form is merely imitating me. I am none other than Saturn's Sovereign. She bent her body down to Qin Mu's face, expecting to see fear on the face of this youth. She wanted to see uneasiness and despair after his knowledge has been destroyed. Qin Mu tried his best to stay composed, but she still saw the fear deep in his heart. Saturn's Sovereign raised her head in satisfaction and smiled. What an interesting little man, trying his best to be like an adult yet looking so cute from not knowing anything. Didn't you say a Yudu phrase when you boarded the ship? You only know that single Yudu phrase, right? That phrase is Gate of Heaven influence. Did you really think I would have retreated just because of hearing this phrase and allow you to board the ship? Qin Mu suppressed the trembling of his body. In front of a godlike Saturn Sovereign, all his schemes were useless. Like what she had said, he had always tried his best to be like an adult, a person that could shoulder everything. He learned how the people of the village handled things and learned from what they did, yet in nature, he was still a big boy. In front of Saturn Sovereign, his hard work, his studies, his maturity all seemed laughable. Looking at how you are trying your best to act like an adult, I won't make things difficult for you. Saturn Sovereign returned to the tree, and her tail coiled around the divine tree like a woman clinging to the man she loved. The flesh membranes behind her head opened up and trembled as she smiled. Qin Hanjin, you should be happy that you, father and son, have reunited, so why am I feeling such sorrow from you? That's right, that's because from today onwards, both of you will be separated forever, one living and one dying. Sure, there's no need for you to be like this. She slithered to the man in the tree and looked up at him while talking leisurely. If you say the location of Carefree Village, all your children and clansmen will be free to go to Yudu to accompany you. Truly interesting, a pitiful human dared to make a deal with a god and thought to have struck a bargain, not knowing that he had lost everything. Meanwhile, the chips I had used for the deal were merely your life. She came to the right side of the man in the tree and couldn't resist smiling. Her expression was filled with happiness, and she whispered beside his ear, I used your life in exchange for the lives of everyone in Carefree Village, as well as the life of your son. And you merely got a chance to meet your son for a moment. What a foolish mortal, even if you mastered the power of gods and devils, you were still affected by your foolish thoughts. Like this, you will never achieve the mental state of gods. And because you are bounded by the pact of Earth Count, you can't go against your oath. The man in the tree regained his composure and opened his mouth. However, since his tongue had already turned into wood, he couldn't make any sound. Saturn's sovereign smiled. "What are you trying to say?" The man in the tree moved his mouth again, but nothing came out. Saturn's sovereign came closer, wishing to know what he was speaking. She asked curiously, "What are you trying to say?" The man in the tree still couldn't utter a sound. Qin Mu's mental state suddenly calmed down, and he said, "Saturn sovereign, the hearts of father and son are one. I think I know what he is trying to say." Saturn's sovereign took a look at him. He certainly didn't make any sound, yet you could hear. The life of us father and son are in Saturn's sovereign's hand. With this, is Saturn's sovereign still afraid of us playing any tricks? Qin Mu said. Saturn's sovereign looked at him deeply and chuckled. "You guys can't play any tricks. Come over, let's see what he wants to say." Qin Mu went forward and came to the face of the man in the tree. Tilting his head to listen, he said after a moment, "He is saying that his eyes are almost blind so he can't see my face clearly, therefore this doesn't count as seeing me, which is why the Pact of Earth count is still not in effect." Saturn's sovereign was astonished and smiled. "Interesting, I would have never expected you, father and son, to indeed have interlinked intentions. This is troublesome." The forbidden technique he executed fused him with the divine tree, and it is called Spring Comes Upon a Withered Tree, a forbidden technique that borrows life force from others. However, its drawback is also very strong. Not only are the lives interconnected, the same happens even to the corporeal bodies. When your father fought with those gods, he exhausted them to death, but he also exhausted himself to death, thus he had no choice but to extend his life with a forbidden technique. Now, only his face is yet to completely turn into wood, so reversing this process is very difficult, but not for me. After all, I'm from Udu and control life. The flesh membranes behind Saturn's sovereign's head opened up and revealed the pictures of the eyes. Two beams shot out from them and hit the body of the man in the tree. Gradually, the wood on the surface started to shed off, and the vein lines on the skin of his neck no longer looked like grains of a tree. This video will end here.